Christopher and Melanie Jarvis never could have imagined that something like this would happen to their family. Their own sons were asking them to leave their own house or else they would be forced out. The cozy house where Christopher and Melanie had lived for the past 40 years had stopped being a place they wished to return to. It was filled with bitter memories of their son's greed and betrayal. Christopher and Melanie had lost their trust in their sons and were heartbroken by their behavior. They had hoped to pass on their home to their children as an inheritance, but now that idea seemed far from reality. The large house where Christopher and Melanie lived was an elegant old-fashioned mansion. It had beautiful Venetian windows that adorned the facade and allowed natural light to flood the interior, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. The house was surrounded by a small garden with a variety of flowers that bloomed throughout the year, creating a colorful and fragrant atmosphere. Ambience in the garden was their pride and joy, and they spent many hours tending to it, watering the plants, and ensuring that each flower was healthy. According to someone who didn't know about the horrible things that were happening inside the walls, it looked like an ordinary family home that any family would dream of. Christopher and Melanie were over 70 years old, and they had spent most of their lives working hard to build a secure future for their family. They had always been loving and supportive parents. And their dream was to spend their old age surrounded by their children and grandchildren, enjoying each other's company, and creating new memories. However, their dream was shattered 4 years ago when their two sons, Stephen and Vincent, declared that they needed to sell the house and ask Christopher and Melanie to vacate it. It was a shocking revelation that left the elderly couple in a state of disbelief and despair. They could not comprehend how their own children could turn against them and take away the one thing they had worked so hard for. Christopher and Melanie had refused to leave their home, and this had led to a bitter dispute between the family members. The once loving family had been torn apart by greed, betrayal, and selfishness. Christopher and Melanie had worked hard and made their fortune running an expensive restaurant from the ground up. The couple invested the profits from the restaurant business in real estate over the last 25 years. They had bought 3 houses and acres of land. Vincent and Stephen, the couple's 2 sons, were born just 2 years apart. Their parents didn't allow them to work at the restaurant when they were younger, preferring that they concentrate on their education. However, when they graduated from high school, they started helping their parents run the business. When the kids were old enough to understand how to run a business properly, Christopher decided to transfer all the property to his children's names and retire. This was the beginning of all the trouble for the family. Initially, the parents were proud that their children had inherited the family business and were running it successfully. Vincent and Stephen became good at running the business, but they were also ambitious and wanted to invest heavily in things they didn't understand. One day, Stephen and Vincent mentioned to their parents that they were interested in the construction business. Christopher was surprised to hear about it, but he didn't think anything bad of it and wasn't really concerned. He believed that his sons were capable of making their own decisions and pursuing their own dreams. However, the next time the sons mentioned the construction business, they also said that they would have to sell the restaurant to pursue it. This was a red flag for Christopher and Melanie, as the restaurant was their only source of income and had been the family's livelihood for years. They had worked hard to build it up and provide for their family, and they were not willing to let it go without a good reason. At first, it was a friendly family discussion about whether selling the restaurant and entering unknown waters was a good idea. Christopher and Melanie were willing to listen to their sons' plans and offer advice and support. However, as time passed, the sons got richer, their appetites grew, and they started making demands and putting pressure on their parents to sell the restaurant and hand over the promise to them. Christopher and Melanie became increasingly uncomfortable with their sons' behavior. They could sense that their sons were more interested in money and power than in family values and love. They tried to reason with them and explain the importance of family and togetherness, but their sons seemed to have lost touch with these values. One day Stephen, the younger son, came to his parents' house and declared that they were determined to sell the restaurant. The parents spent hours trying to explain that it wasn't a good idea at all, but Stephen was adamant. Christopher and Melanie were dumbfounded. They didn't know what had gotten into their sons' heads. The next day, Stephen visited his parents with his brother Vincent. After an hour of heated arguments, for the first time in his life, Vincent yelled at his own parents. It happened when Vincent told his father that the restaurant was in his name and he could do whatever he wanted with it. Melanie was flabbergasted. "What do you mean you can do whatever you want? It's in your name, but it's still a family business. Don't you think you should listen to us too?" After all, we've worked hard to build it, and we don't want to give it away just like that. Why aren't you guys listening to us? We're your parents. After all, listen, I'm already 45 years old. I'm not little Vincent anymore. Stop treating me as a kid. You're going to kick the bucket soon. Anyway, why don't you let us do what we want to do? The children stormed out of the house without saying anything. They headed straight to the owner of the restaurant and signed all the necessary papers. When they were done, they took the new owner and drove him to the restaurant to introduce himself to the staffs. When the new owner of the restaurant was introduced to the staff, they were in shock. They had known Christopher and Melanie Jarvis well, and the restaurant was far from just the source of income for the old couple, it was their pride and talisman. The restaurant had been a family business, and the staff had become a part of that family over the years. They had seen Christopher and Melanie's children grow up and had watched the family's ups and downs with interest and affection. Vincent's Aunt Monica Jarvis worked as an accountant in the restaurant, and she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always known her nephew to be ambitious and driven, but she never thought that he would go so far as to betray his own parents. Monica felt a sense of guilt for not seeing the signs earlier and not being able to prevent the family dispute. When she asked Vincent why he was selling the restaurant, he said it was none of her business, and if she wanted to keep her job, she better keep her mouth shut and do her job. Monica couldn't believe that Vincent was saying these things to her. She immediately called and informed Christopher about the deal. The staff members of the restaurant were equally shocked and saddened by the news. They had formed close bonds with the family and had always felt that the restaurant was a special place. A place where they could work with pride and passion. They were afraid that the new owner would not share the same values and that the restaurant would lose its soul and character. However, to their surprise, the new owner, Hank Crawford, turned out to be a kind and respectful person who understood the importance of the restaurant to Christopher and Melanie and the community. He pledged to maintain the same quality of food and service that the restaurant had always been known for and promised to honor the legacy of the Jarvis family. The brothers invested all the money they got from selling the restaurant in the construction business. Vincent's business partner was a woman named Patricia Arnold, who worked for a large developer company. She was the one who had promised to make them unbelievably rich in a matter of several months. The brothers believed her. 2 months later, Vincent was sitting in the conference room, nervously tapping on the table with his fingers. He was waiting for Patricia and her latest report on their investment. A few moments later, Patricia walked in and said she had wonderful news. The company was doing great and planned to finish building the tower before handing it in. Patricia mentioned that they had very lucrative investment packages for another project. She gave a small presentation about the project. Everything looked promising for Vincent. He pondered for a moment and smiled at Patricia. "I think we're in," he said, and they shook hands. That evening, Vincent and Steve decided to sell their houses and invest the money in that project. The brothers were excited about becoming extremely rich. Soon, they threw a party to honor the deal. Meanwhile, Christopher and Melanie continued living in their house. It was the only property left to them. Vincent's wife, Karen, and her 2 daughters often visited the grandparents. They were on their side and didn't favor the sale of the restaurant from the moment it was brought up. Karen and Vincent often had fights about it. One day, Vincent was watching the news and saw a report that the company they were investing in was under investigation by the government. The CEO was accused of embezzling company resources. Vincent called Patricia right away and set up an appointment. This time he was very nervous, his hands and feet shaking uncontrollably, but even an hour past their appointment, Patricia didn't show up. She wasn't answering calls either. Vincent left a lot of voice messages, but to no avail. 2 days later, she finally called Vincent and explained that the company was experiencing some financial difficulties and that they were working hard to figure out a way to deal with the situation. Vincent didn't like where it was all going. He called Steve and gave him the news. A few days later, they heard on the news that the company they had invested all their money in from the sale of the properties was filing for bankruptcy. "You told me you guys were a fast-growing company and had excellent return on investment rates. We want to get our funds back." Vincent yelled on the phone to Patricia. Patricia was silent. Vincent asked her if she heard him. A few moments later, she told Vincent that, unfortunately, Vincent wasn't on the list of preferred shareholders and would receive whatever was left of the company. Vincent screamed and hung up the phone. Rain was slowly tapping on Christopher and Melanie's bedroom window when they heard a loud knock on the front door. Recently, the couple added a new habit of locking the door, which had never been locked before. Times had changed, and they wanted to be secure. The knocking intensified, and Christopher went downstairs to see who it was. It was Vincent knocking on the door and asking to be let in. Christopher asked what he wanted, and Vincent said he just wanted to talk. "We have nothing to talk about." Christopher shouted back through the window and closed it. He walked back upstairs to the bed, turned the knob, and unlocked the door. He ran up the stairs to the second floor and kicked open the door. Vincent switched on the line and went straight for his dad. He grabbed him by the collar and shook him violently, causing Christopher to stumble and almost lose his balance. "Why did you lock the door on me, old man? Why did you do that?" Vincent was furious, his face was contorted with rage and anger. Christopher could see the madness in his son's eyes, and he knew that he was in grave danger. He tried to push Vincent away, but his son was too strong and too agitated. Christopher's heart was racing, and he could feel the fear and adrenaline pumping through his veins. Melanie, half asleep, was shocked to see her own son shaking her husband like that. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she was frozen with fear and disbelief. "Vincent, what are you doing to your own father? What's gotten into you, son?" Melanie managed to ask these two questions before she burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. Vincent was furious, he told his mother to shut up. Melanie had never been so scared before, as at that point her own son had turned into a monster. She felt so weak in front of this big guy, who was once a fragile little baby that she nursed. In her arms, Melanie begged Vincent not to hurt Christopher. She walked up between the father and son and tried to separate them, but Vincent pushed her hard, and she stumbled back. Fortunately, there was a bed, and she almost hit the edge of it. Melanie screamed in her tears. "Vincent, what are you doing, son? You're our beloved son. We've always treated you well. Why are you doing these things to us? We've given you everything you've asked for." Vincent's eyes were red with blood. Melanie could see that he hadn't slept for days. His appearance was shabby. He looked like he needed some rest, but his energy was bursting from anxiety. After all, he had lost everything he had invested in the phony project. All the money was gone in a matter of a few months. Vincent and Stephen literally had nothing left. "You're going to have to get out of this house. We're selling it," Vincent declared after taking some time to catch his breath. "I need money. I need money today and tomorrow, as soon as possible." The couple looked at each other in disbelief. That was the last thing they wanted to hear from Vincent. Not only was this the only property left of their son's ruthless ambitions, but it was also a house the couple had built with their own hands. It was a place where they had raised their children, celebrated holidays, and made countless memories. The thought of leaving it behind was unbearable for them. Christopher was determined to protect the house at all costs. He'd worked hard his entire life to build a home for his family, and he was not going to let his sons take it away from him. He knew that he had to be strong and resolute, even in the face of his son's anger and threats. "You're not getting anything. This house is in your mother's name." Christopher screamed, "Good thing we didn't put it in your name." He added it with a smirk at that moment. Stephen stormed in, unrecognizable with his red face, ready to attack and hurt his own parents, but Vincent stopped him and told him that they needed their mother alive to inherit the house. Melanie was desperately praying to God to stop the craziness and asking what she had done to deserve such treatment. The sons tried to persuade their parents to sell the house, but they refused. Vincent had a different plan. As the days passed, tensions continued to rise. Vincent and Stephen became increasingly aggressive and hostile towards their parents, demanding that they sign over the house to them. Christopher and Melanie refused to budge, and the standoff became increasingly tense and dangerous. It was a difficult and painful time for the couple, as they were caught in the middle of a family feud that seemed to have no one inside. They knew that they had to protect themselves on their property, but they also hoped that their sons would come to their senses and realize the gravity of their actions. Stephen was living with his brother's family in a cramped 3-bedroom apartment with his children. Vincent and his wife were constantly fighting, and that night he asked her to help him frame his mother to say certain things. Karen was tired of Vincent's madness, but she wasn't afraid of him. She looked them in the eyes and said firmly, "I'm not playing your dirty games. I am your wife, but what you're doing is disgusting. These are your own parents. Do you realize that? Vincent said, how much? I'll give you 20 grand if you do this for me. What do you say? I know you love money. Come on, baby, 20 grand is easy money. He was offering a bribe to his wife. Karen looked up at her husband in disbelief. She shook her head and said, I love money. Money gives you freedom. Money buys you things, but I'll never do what you're asking me to do. Who do you think I am? Do you think I would do anything for money? You married the wrong woman. If you think about it, Karen stood up and stormed out of the room. These past 4 years had been a nightmare for the old couple, who had dreamed of taking care of their grandchildren and enjoying their retirement peacefully. They didn't want to file a police report. Even after all that had occurred, Christopher found a lawyer and started coming up with a strategy. The legal battle was long and arduous, but Christopher and Melanie were determined to see through to the end. They knew that justice was on their side, and they were prepared to fight for their rights and their dignity. Their lawyer, Latifa Usman, was a young and ambitious attorney who took on their case with great passion and dedication. She spent countless hours poring over documents, gathering evidence and building a strong case against their sons. The trial was a grueling process that took a toll on the couple's health and well-being. They had to relive the pain and trauma of their son's betrayal, and they had to face the harsh reality of their situation. Finally, after a year-long fact-gathering and another year of trials, Latifa Usman found a way to serve justice to the old couple. The court ruled in their favor, and their sons were charged with fraudulent activity and threatening to harm people. The funds that had been stolen from them were returned, and the couple felt a sense of relief. Vindication reporters swarmed Jarvis's house after the case became public. Their story was widely covered in the media and has sparked a national conversation about the importance of family values and the need to protect our loved ones from harm. Many people were inspired by their courage and resilience, and they reached out to offer their support and encouragement. In the end, Christopher and Melanie were able to reclaim their dignity and their home. They knew that the scars of their son's greed and selfishness would never fully heal, but they also knew that they had each other and the strength to move forward. What are you going to do with the funds that you recovered? A reporter asked the couple, and Christopher replied without hesitation. We already discussed that with my wife. All the money is going to charity, and we don't want to have anything to do with it. Christopher concluded that every parent has been hurt by their children often. It is not a one-time accident. A child may know that they're hurting their parents, yet they keep doing it because they know their parents will always love them. This is a true story that took place not long ago. What do you think about it? Leave your comment below and check out other stories on our channel.